Greetings and welcome to our MS ExchangeCon 2016 breakout session, Troubleshooting Office 365 and Azure User Authentication Issues. We want to welcome GSX as a new sponsor for this year's event. I'm Roger, I'll be the event moderator, and I have a few quick housekeeping items before I introduce our speakers. All participant lines are muted, but we do encourage you to use the questions panel to submit any questions or comments you have during the presentation, and we'll try to get to those, as many of those as possible. We will be concluding this session in time for those of you who will be joining the next breakout session, which will begin immediately following this one. We will be using the Twitter hashtag MSExchangeCon, that's MSExchangeCon, to share the links to the subsequent focus sessions, and those links will also be available in your email confirmation. Our speakers for today are Tim Book and Olivier Raynaud. Tim has been with GSX Solutions for 7 years and has held various roles within GSX, with his current being as the technical sales manager. He's a former messaging administrator and has experience with multiple technologies and platforms, as well as pre-sales and customer support. Olivier Raynaud is a member of the GSX technical sales team and the product management team for almost 3 years now. He has in-depth PowerShell experience and a strong knowledge of Microsoft platforms, including Office 365, Exchange, SharePoint, and Skype for Business. And now, Tim, I will turn it over to you to get us started.
Thanks, Roger. Really appreciate it. So, today's agenda, what are we going to be talking about here? The main portion is identity and access management. What we're really trying to do is to empower you, to give you more visibility and control over the cloud services that you benefit from. We're going to be talking about IAM, or Identity Access Management in general. What is it? We're going to be talking about different Office 365 architectures. Olivier is going to be explaining those. We'll talk about some common challenges that can come up with identity and access management for cloud infrastructures and how some things that you could handle them. And then we'll talk a little bit about how GSX and our suite of products could help you overcome some of these challenges and help you with the implementation and your identity and access management that you have. So first thing, let's talk about what is identity and access management. What we're really talking about here, when we talk about identity and access management, we're talking about controlling access to various systems, networks, resources, and etc. And at least for me, we're talking about two different parts when we mention that. We're talking about identity management and we're talking about access management. Identity management is the organization and the storage of the actual IDs being used. So usernames, passwords, the expirations associated with those, certificates, could be key fobs and different credentials, the actual identities themselves, the things that your users use or you use to be able to access those different resources. And then we have the access management itself, the organization and storage of those actual IDs under identity management, but we've got to actually control the permissions and the access requirements associated with those IDs. Basically the whats, we would call that, access control lists and the management of those and things like that. So you've got the who part of it, the identity management, those IDs, and then the what it has access to, what that account is allowed to do. But one part of that as well is the why. Why do those accounts have access to those IDs that you have? Why does that person have this level of access to a certain system? Why are these system accounts around? What are they being used for? How have they been used? Who has access to what resources is great, and being able to manage those and reset passwords and expired certificates, those are all great things to do, but we also need to know why those things are in place and what kinds of challenges are associated with those, what kinds of risks could be associated to the business as well. We need to be able to identify those to reduce that risk as well. So what I'll do now is turn it over to Olivier, and he's going to talk about some common setups and architectures associated with identity and access management.
Thank you, Tim. So yes, before showing a little bit the different challenges, we want to go over the different architectures and the most common setups that exist. So in order to understand identity and access management with Office 365, we need to understand the different scenarios that are possible for the Office 365 identities and the authentication, and it really depends on the chosen architecture. So Office 365 using the cloud-based service Azure Active Directory to manage all the users, but there are three main identity models in Office 365 when you set up and manage user accounts. So you could use the cloud-only identities, So we'll see this is basically managing users' account in Office 365 only. There's no on-premise servers that are required. It's all done in the cloud. We'll talk a little bit about the synchronized identities with passwords. So here you would be synchronizing both identities and password. So they would be the same on-premise and in the cloud. And the last one will be the federated identities, where you synchronize on-premise directory, but you do not synchronize password, so you have a little bit more components that have to play. So we'll see those different possibilities for different use case. There are probably more than those three, but they are the most common and the ones that we want to focus on. So let's go. Let's identify quickly each scenario, and I'll cover what it is really about, why and when you would use that. So first one, the cloud-only identities. So in this model, you create and manage users in Office 365 Admin Center. So I'm sure you're all familiar with that. Everything is stored, all the accounts are stored in the Azure Active Directory. And when an authentication happens, it's really the Azure AD that verifies the password. And Azure AD is the cloud directory that is used by Office 365. So in this model, there are no on-premises servers that are required. Microsoft will manage all of that for you. So when identity and authentication are handled completely in the cloud, you can manage users' account and user licenses and everything in Office 365 through the Admin Center, or sometimes you need some of the PowerShell commandlets to interact with that. There are different steps that would be involved when you manage users in this cloud-only model. For example, step one would be the admin connects to the Office 365 Admin Center in the Microsoft Cloud. You can issue some create or manage users requests. The create or manage requests are passed on to the Azure AD or Azure Active Directory that you see on the right. Step three, if this is a change request, the change is made and copied back to the Office 365 Admin Center. And lastly, the new user accounts and changes to existing user accounts would be copied back to the Office 365 Admin Center. So in this model, you have everything on the cloud. This is the default Office 365 sign-up. Why and when would you use it? So if you're probably a new or a small organization and you have no on-premise user directory, which is kind of not very common. There's a lot of Active Directory or other directory usually on-premise. The other option would be if you have something very complex on-premise, like a very complex setup for directories that you do not want to integrate within Office 365. Or the most common thing is if you're doing a trial or a POC of Office 365, that would be probably what would happen. The big drawback here would be that end users would have probably different accounts and passwords for any services that they use, their login for computers and everything local, and with the services that they use in the cloud. So second model, very common, it would be synchronized identities and password. So what this is user can use a single identity to access on-premises application and cloud services such as Office 365. So you have a single tool to provide this experience for the synchronization and the sign-in. You have different options. So basically the idea is to synchronize both the account and passwords from your on-premise Active Directory to the Azure Active Directory. So you use that using Azure AD Connect, for example, that will run that synchronization and ensure that both the cloud and the on-premise directories are always up to date and synchronized. In this case, it would be the same as a previous scenario. The authentication would take place in Azure AD and not on-premise. Okay, and you have different options. You have a lot of filtering that you can provide so that you can control which objects are synchronized or not. By default, it's all the users, contact groups, and computers, but you can change that based on domain, OUs, or any attributes. You can select different options for the password synchronization in order to synchronize the password hash in Active Directory to Azure AD, so that end users can have the same password, right? You don't want them to have two different passwords with the same account. Now possibility for password write-back as well, so that this will allow users to change and reset their passwords in the cloud, but have the on-premise password policy applied. And you have different options like device write-back. There are features to prevent accidental deletes, automatic upgrades, so a lot of different applications. Why and when you would do that? Most likely if you have an on-premise Active Directory, if you're not ready to deploy some federation services like ADFS, that would be a common scenario. And so let's talk about the third architecture, the federated identities. So this model requires a synchronized identity, but one change to that model, it would be that the user password would be verified on-premise instead of within the cloud. This means that the password hash does not need to be synchronized. It can, but it's unnecessary, and this would use ADFS, so Active Directory Federation Services, or a third-party identity provider to make the authentication. So here to deploy that architecture, you would first install Azure AD Connect, so Azure Active Directory Connect, which is the synchronization tool that will help to keep both directories up to date. Then you will need to create new users. When you have new users, you will need to create them in the on-premise Active Directory, and Azure AD Connect tool will synchronize that with the cloud. And when it provisions these identities in the Azure AD, everything would be linked in the on-premise and the cloud identities. And when you make changes in the on-premise, they're always synchronized and pushed to Azure AD and then available through the Office 365 Admin Center. So the main difference here would be that all federated users, when they would sign in, this would actually go through the ADFS. ADFS would generate a security token, and that token will be passed to Azure AD. And this token is verified and validated so that the users are finally authorized to access Office 365 and the different services. So why and when? Well, again, same as the previous scenario when you have an on-premise user directory. If you already have ADFS because you were federating different services that were possible, that were available before. If you have multiple forests, if you have on-premise smart card solution, you have to do that. Or also there are some areas where you have specific policies in place like sign-in audit, or you need to be able to immediately disable authentication. So to have the most control, you would need to have this scenario. And so you can see in this scenario on the right, the architecture is a little bit more complex because you have not only the Azure AD Connect, but also the ADFS server, and maybe you have some ADFS proxies as well, plus all the high availability scenarios. So we'll hand over to Tim for discussing a little bit about the challenges.
Thanks, Olivier. So what we're going to talk about right now are some of the top challenges that might be associated with identity and access management. We'll talk about multiple accounts and SSO, some accounting and auditing issues, and then some possible technical issues with ADFS and DirSync, and then we'll get into a little bit about how GSX might be able to help with some of these challenges here in overall identity access management. So the first scenario here we're talking about is multiple accounts and SSO, or single sign-on. What do we talk about when we say multiple credentials? Having many logins to disparate systems. This leads to user frustration and admin headaches. It's a pain for administrators to have to maintain separate directories, troubleshoot issues in different ways, and split resources amongst those systems. There's the possibility of having to maintain legacy or out-of-support technologies that you might need for the business that don't support SSO. And then you have to, for the user side of things, it's remembering multiple sets of credentials that they wish to access. There's going to be more user frustration, higher support costs, more calls to the help desk, more calls to you on your lunch break and things like that. So what you're really trying to do is eliminate those types of issues by consolidating these things, if possible, into what we call SSO, or single sign-on. It's ideal for users and admins to be able to enable this. Reduces the frustration, reduces the troubleshooting, reduces overall cost and returns on that administration that you're doing. For the users, theoretically, you want to get down to one set of credentials to use for them to remember and maintain. Not always possible, though, due to different business requirements. There could be legacy systems, like I mentioned, that don't support it. But in an ideal environment, we want to get down to a single sign-on type architecture. Makes things easiest for the administrators and for users themselves. And then accounting and auditing. What are we talking about when we talk about accounting and auditing? It's very common for organizations to have to think about auditing and accounting during IAM type issues. There could be compliance reasons that they come into, different regulations that we have here in the United States, like HIPAA and SOX. There's a lot of data control policies inside of some of the European countries that I know, for example, and some of the Asian countries. So businesses and you as admins are going to have to be aware of these things and have to be able to keep track of that information and account for these to comply with these policies. You need accounting for why rights and privileges were granted in the first place. You know, what is the purpose of that system account having domain admin access, for example? Is that application that uses that system account still around? Are these admins that have access to your system, higher level of access to your system, still around? Do these users or these groups of users need access to these systems, these resources, file shares, HR systems, CRM systems, whatever it may be? Do they still need that access, and why do they still need that access? We need to be able to justify that as administrators so we can simplify management, but also sometimes to businesses, to the lines of business, to be able to say, here's why these people have this access, here's what's required for them to do their job, or the other way around, the business coming to us and saying, here's what we need, and us being able to say as administrators, actually no, what we actually need to do is permissions X, Y, and Z. You don't need that level of access. It's a security issue and the risk that's been identified. And then being able to identify old and expired credentials, like I mentioned, former employees, service accounts that are no longer around, and does that account, whatever it be, service account, user account, really need that level of access that you're trying to give it? We all know those application owners or even those business units, users that say that they need access for a certain application that they're installing or something to do their job. But us as administrators, again, we need to be able to come with the information, the real facts that we need to be able to say, no, actually what needs to happen is this. We don't need to be able to give you that kind of access. We have run into too many issues, too many risks associated with that. Something goes wrong, malware infections, rogue employees, things like that. We don't want to be exposing the business to that because that's not only time and troubleshooting, but that's money. That's bottom line to the business that we don't want to be exposed. And then our third portion here, some technical issues with ADFS and DirSync. Specifically talking about ADFS and DirSync, there could be some technical issues with them as well. Like Olivier mentioned in the architecture slides, what ADFS and DirSync are doing, responsible for credential synchronization, password synchronization, authentication, being able to make it as seamless to the end user as possible to be able to access what they need to get done. Okay, there's a lot of different things that can go wrong or could be set up incorrectly with ADFS, for example, that could diminish the service that's being delivered, make things basically not work. Certificate expiration, IAS authentication issues, not exposing the service properly to the internet for your outside users, a distrust between the proxy and ADFS if your architecture requires that. So lots of different little things that can be going on that would prevent access. Same kinds of things with directory synchronization or DirSync, failed synchronizations, the sync scheduled and not running, running too long, things like that are going to lead into issues with your directories and everything being in sync. And then a major thing to note is that it cannot just be ADFS and DirSync issues. There's lots of other components that can play into the whole container of what we call identity and access management. Things like your Active Directory, Azure AD Connect for using that. Obviously, accessing Office 365, Office 365 is going to be a big portion of it. Now, if that service is down, if you're not able to access that, if the network is not performing well, for example, the overall issue is that users are not going to be able to get their jobs done, to get what they need, to get access to the resources that they need. So ADFS can be chugging along fine. Certificates are in place, accounts are synchronizing, scheduled jobs are running, no issues on that technical side, but your network is down, or there's some sort of saturation, a link at a remote office or something like that. The end result for those users, even with ADFS working great, is that the service is down. They can't get to the resources that they want. So it's more than just focusing in on those specific technologies. We just wanted to mention those because those are the most popular, or some of the most popular that we come across, but there are other components that could lead into issues that ultimately affect your end users. So troubleshooting some of these issues. Like I had mentioned, a lot of other components are involved in user authentication when you're specifically hitting 365 in a federated environment. All these different portions here, Azure AD Connect, ADFS, proxies, Office 365 itself, the network, security devices, firewalls, all those sorts of things, the desktop itself. I mean, there's lots of different components, lots of different little pieces of information that we can go for as administrators to get an idea of what's going on in the environment, to see where the problem lies and focus our resources on our troubleshooting to that. So what I'll do is turn it over to Olivier now, who's going to talk a little bit about GSX and some of the different suites of products that we have that could help troubleshoot some of these issues, to monitor some of these components, and then let you know that there are service issues that could be affecting the end user.
Yes, thank you, Tim. So let me just introduce you briefly through the company, and then let's see how GSX can help you solve those challenges that we've presented to you, and set you a little bit more context also about the troubleshooting. So first, GSX. So who we are? We have been founded in 1996. We are headquartered in Switzerland, but we have offices throughout the world. We currently have about 600 customers. They are all over the globe in about 40 different countries. And we now specialize in Office 365 solutions, especially for large enterprises. But as you will see, there are really not specific kind of clients. It's really on how important that is, and the different line of business, how they rely on the applications. So to quickly show you and explain our expertise, we have a skill center. We're a member of the Microsoft tab, so we test all the Microsoft products as early as possible, adapt our tools, and we get a lot of feedback, a lot of experiences that we provide back to our clients. We have different references in the different verticals, from small to large enterprises. We've been around in 20 years around for monitoring and reporting, as well as in-depth usage reporting, as I will show you, mainly for messaging and collaboration. But because everything impacts this, we also have a lot about the more system and network level now for the infrastructure, because it has impact on the end user. And our team, as you've seen, is throughout the world. We have follow-the-sun support and development that is located in France. To give you just an idea of the different customers, we have some large banks and insurance companies, some governmental institutions, all kinds of different businesses. As long as the email system is critical, the messaging and collaboration environment is something that you need visibility on, both in terms of preventing incidents and on reporting and having visibility on the data and the metrics. So I'm going to highlight the three main solutions that could help you for Office 365, and especially, as we've discussed today, for identity and access management. So in order to help you with those different challenges, we have three main solutions that I'd like to show you quickly and explain. So the first one is GSX Monitor and Analyzer. It's really focusing on the end-to-end performance monitoring as well as the underlying infrastructure to prevent any incidents and have visibility on the services that you are responsible for. Then we have 365 usage that is focused on the reporting on the usage and the different settings in Office 365 to provide visibility on those permissions and passwords and all the accounts. And the last one is 365 Enterprise Management. We can't talk about IAM without talking about actually managing those user accounts, password licenses, and provide you with a complete tool for administration. So let me start with GSX Monitor, explain you a little bit the philosophy. So our philosophy has always been the same, always monitoring at the application level, and have really like end user scenarios to measure the quality of the service that you provide to the end users. Of course, we also monitor the underlying infrastructure, as I will show you in the next slide. But the concept is really to have visibility over everything that's going on and all the services that you're responsible for, and provide them in a centralized monitoring and alerting dashboard. Also, that service is probably consumed by your end users in multiple locations. So we have different, what we call robot users that you can deploy in multiple critical sites and identify which one would have some local performance issues, and you can see that in a consolidated multi-location dashboard. So we really want to be able to provide you real-time availability and performance, have alerts that enable you to act proactively and prevent any major incidents, and have really good visibility over the service that's delivered, so that you can identify unusual activities, prevent incidents, and you have a lot of features where you can customize, look at the evolution of the data for that. So in the next slide, here you can see a little bit the different layers of what happens when somebody connects to Office 365. So if we look at the diagram from the bottom to the top, you can see you have probably different end users in multiple offices. They're connecting through Outlook clients, through mobile devices using ActiveSync, or maybe through an MDM solution. So every location will have some direct impact of what client they're using, what is the local network performance in that location, and what different layers they go through. So they might go through some MDM solutions, through some load balancers. Maybe you also have some on-premise messaging servers. Then for the authentication, we've seen there are multiple components involved, from ADFS proxy, ADFS, Azure AD Connect to Synchronized. The authentication could be directly in Azure Active Directory. For all the emails and flows, you might have some security appliances like IronPort or Proofpoint, for example, just to name a couple. So all these different layers, they need to be monitored. You need to have visibility over those because you might be responsible for them, or if not, they are impacting the service that you are responsible for the end users. So our goal is really to provide you with complete visibility over the entire stack of these different layers that can impact end user experience. So the next second tool that we have is called 365 usage, and so we've talked a lot about IAM and the different visibility and reports that you need on the passwords, the accounts, who has access to what, and the different permissions, as Tim explained earlier. So in this tool, you have a lot of in-depth reports available for Office 365. So a lot about the usage and licenses, of course, but if we really focus on IAM, you have a lot of mailbox security reports that will focus on the different permissions of users. So for like user mailbox, shared mailboxes. And this is really important because, as Tim explained, like now there's just so much to keep track of as employees migrate through different roles, and it becomes more and more difficult to manage those identities and access. And a common problem is that privileges are granted as needed when an employee change, but the access level is never really revoked. Nobody asks for removing some permissions. So it's really important to keep track of that. Another good report is about the administrative roles. So you need to understand and know at any time who has access to that Office 365 portal. So this is a very important report. We have some reports on passwords, like last time it was changed, the complexity password, around all the permissions in SharePoint, and of course we have a lot of reports on the usage, license, and compliance as well. Another great feature of the tool is the fact that you can delegate the access and the permissions. So for example, if you have another team, another department like accounting that needs access to specific license reports, or the security team, and you want to provide them with all the permissions and the roles reporting, you can give them access on that tool, and they don't need to have any kind of specific privileges in Office 365 portal. They can just access those reports as read-only, customize it, and make their own dashboard. So really, really great feature here. The last tool that I want to show you a little bit is 365 Enterprise Management. So this is to allow you to manage the actual end user's accounts and permissions. The idea is that you can do some of those actions in the Office 365 portal, but sometimes you have to use PowerShell to edit the calendar permission, provide delegation. So here we want to provide an intuitive PowerShell-free UI that allows you to perform all those actions in one location. So here you can manage the different access and licenses, all the distribution groups, and the great feature is that you can delegate access as well. So if you need to provide access to the help desk to just reset the passwords, or maybe look at the user data, maybe add some permissions, you can. It's very granular in terms of permissions, and they don't need to have actual access to the Office 365 portal to do that. You can have a lot of options to provide permissions through organizational units, and it's very granular in terms of delegation. So that allows you to automate a lot of actions, reduce the risk for errors. You can keep track of all the changes and see who made what changes and when. So overall it helps you a lot to reduce the operational cost because you can delegate a lot of that administration throughout the different teams. So to recap what we've seen today and how GSX can help you, you've seen the three main tools that we offer for Office 365 and that help solve all the challenges that we've seen for the IAM. First one, ensure that end user satisfaction and reduce the time to repair because you have visibility over the environment, both what you still have on premise and the cloud environment, and you have proactive alerting that helps you to solve the issues. Second tool, ensure to maintain your Office 365 ROI as well as ensuring security and compliance for all the permissions, all the usage of the platforms, and you can enforce security. All that, of course, through single sign-on and delegating access. And the last one really helps you reducing your administration costs because you can delegate administration with more granularity, you can reduce the risk, keep track of changes, and automate a lot of the most common actions. So we would love to discuss with you and show you more of the tool. We also offer a free trial that you can do with us. The process is extremely simple. Please contact us to get a free walkthrough with somebody in our technical team and benefit from immediate reports, visibility, and results on your Office 365 environment.
Well, thank you, Olivier. And we do have some questions that I'll jump right into. I'm just going to throw these out and let you and Tim reply. Number one is, you discussed several architectures. Which architecture do you recommend? Which ones are the most common?
Okay, I'll take that question. So we've presented three main architecture. The first one we don't really recommend because, as Tim explained, there would be no single sign-on, different user accounts, different password. So definitely second and third, where you are synchronizing your on-premise directories, and the one with ADFS. Then it really depends on your organization. I would say we probably encounter a little bit more of the ADFS because we deal with a lot of large companies, and obviously you want to have more control about the authentication, the security, and keep that control on-premise with a security team. So probably the third scenario with ADFS would be the most common architecture.
All right, the next question is, for the usage reporting tool, how do you connect to Office 365?
Yeah, good question. So basically when you sign up for the tool, and you can do that online in really 5 minutes, we will ask you for either a global admin account that will use it temporarily to create a service account, or you can provide your own service account. And all you need is to be service administrator and Exchange view only organization. And then we will use that account to connect to your Office 365 tenants for the reports by using the REST APIs and some PowerShell commands.
The next question is, in the enterprise management tool, how can users perform actions if they don't have access to Office 365 portal?
I'll take that one. Good question. That is the basic design of the tool there. That's exactly one of the problems we're trying to solve with that. You don't have to give these users access to the portal, administrative access over everything to be able to do some of these tasks. Inside of the tool itself, you create a user in our portal, and Olivier, for example, and you give them access only to the features that you want. Assign licenses, create users, change OUs, manage different parts of the licenses, anything you can divvy up inside of there. That way they don't have to be able to be a full admin inside of your portal.
Very good, and we just have time for one more question. We will be forwarding the questions that we weren't able to get to Tim and Olivier for their follow-up. But for now, the last question we'll take is the GSX trial full-featured or limited?
The trial of everything is fully featured. There'll be no limitations on what you can do functionality-wise. There are some time limits on some of them, and you can always work with our account and pre-sales teams to get things changed up to your liking. But everything, you should be able to test all features with all of the trial versions.
Well, thank you, and we'll have to wrap up with that. So on behalf of msexchange.org, I want to thank you, Tim and Olivier, and thank everyone else for joining us today. And of course, we want to thank GSX for helping make it possible for us to bring you today's online event. Don't forget to join us for the next focus session using the separate link for that session, which is available in your confirmation email and can also be found at the hashtag MSExchangeCon. That will conclude this session. Thanks again for attending, and you may now disconnect.